subregions. Now the subregions is just that short extension of the chapter that breaks what we just talked about down a little bit further. I don't think it necessarily goes into a lot more detail, so I hope to cover that just briefly, but this pretty much just wraps up North America, that of the United States and Canada. So New England and the Atlantic provinces, strong connections to the past, known as North America's cultural hearth. And you can see this is largely an area that's grown historically from the fishing industry of that of New England, logging. We're on our second generation of logging now in that region. Manufacturing was once a very staple part of the economy, and it's moved to more of a knowledge-based economy, as we'd see in the quaternary sector, with a lot of rich schools up in that area. Pictured there, Harvard University, among other Ivy League schools in the region. Boston alone has a lot of great schools, and also the city of Boston pictured here. Me checking out some sort of historical statue up in Boston, and of course Ben & Jerry's in Vermont. And so what I tried to do is put a little bit of a personal touch onto the subregions. Again, this is just a brief presentation, but I've been able to travel to at least one point in every single one of these subregions, so you could sort of take my perspective of things, also the book, of course, because what do I know just on my own? So it's sort of important to put them all together, and perhaps it's a little bit more of an interesting section. Obviously a short section, so short video lectures are better video lectures. And so this is old wave immigration dominated this area in the past. We had lots of Italians and Irish and these old world type immigrants, and that really shaped the politics and the religion of the region and sort of the cultural heritage. Now you've seen this change in places like Boston that have seen now a new wave of migrants from that of South Central America and that of Asia, and you've really changed the dynamic of places like southeastern Canada, where a lot of their major cities are, and even some major U.S. cities here in the New England Atlantic provinces area as well. That moves us to Quebec, and now Quebec is a distinct area, and that being that it's just one province in that of Canada. However, it's culturally distinct in the sense of its French history. Now, by 1760, 65,000 French settlers have turned to this region, 300 years of history tied to France. And so in Quebec City, you could be strolling down the streets and really believe that you are in fact maybe in a European setting in terms of that close connection also with its heritage. Settling along the river that comes through the area was what happened after World War II. There was rapid growth going on. And then, like I mentioned in another slide, that quiet revolution that took place. And beginning in the 1970s, there was a push for a pro-French movement and a pro-independence movement as the people of Quebec saw that they believed that there was an attack on their culture, and so they also pushed back. And it's independent in the sense that it has gained control of certain types of resources and other mechanisms, but again situated in part of Canada, a province that likes to recognize itself as distinct. Now, the old economic core. This is an area from New York to Illinois. We call this the Rust Belt, although I think the old economic core, I don't know, neither of those exactly sound like a great place. The book isn't exactly trying to sell tourism to these places. I don't know anyone that's like signed me up to go to the old economic core or to go to the Rust Belt. But nonetheless, some people do go here. Also southeastern Canada as well. And these are areas that were dominated by old manufacturing, old steel mills, and a lot of old production at the time. And it's not all old production, it's not all decrepit. There's New York City, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, the Bell, I mean, come on. So I think it's safe to say that with New York City in Chicago in your area, and you're not going to be this old downtrodden town that's all sad now. So this is that because of an eventual shift from manufacturing that's eventually given way to redevelopment, we've been able to see some of these cities never really skip a beat, like the cities that I've mentioned, but nevertheless there is this still this feel that sometimes in certain these places perhaps their better days are behind them. However, not the case. These are communities that were dominated by manufacturing and steel that have not quite yet adjusted to tertiary or quaternary economic sectors. Time will tell if they're able to grab on, but I use the case study of Pittsburgh as an excellent example. Once referred to as a city as hell with the lid off, and I can assure you that picture down there, the city looks a lot nicer than what I would imagine. The imagery from that claim back in the 1970s. That's largely done with investments in technology in the health sector, and that's something that what we've seen of how all these other cities have continued to rebound and continue to make it post the old economic core. The American South and Southeast, we're here, we're living in it. Picture locally from St. Mark's, places like Atlanta, and New Orleans, and Miami, and even places up into Virginia. Beignets in New Orleans. But this is an area that's also culturally distinct. We have imagery that's been assigned to us. The book talks about it. NASCAR racing, barbecue, Southern Baptists, guns. And some of these imageries are true, of course, just based on cultural practices and heritage. Obviously, some of them just stereotypes. So that's why we do what we do now. It's why we read, and it's why we understand these things. But I think it's important. One thing to talk about in this region, particularly, is the Great Migration, where African Americans moved out of the region in the 50s and 60s and moved up to northern cities for work when business was going well up there. And then in the 1990s, when they've moved back into the deep South and the American Southeast. And so I think that second Great Migration is something to really think about, something to talk about. Cities like Atlanta, major gains. However, places like New Orleans lost part of its population post-Hurricane Katrina. The Great Plains breadbasket, another place that probably isn't dominating the tourist industry, but nevertheless very important because of wheat production and livestock, irrigation we talked about through the Ogallala Aquifer, but there's obviously a pushback from Native Americans in this region for what we Americans have done to the environment and what we continue to do for fossil fuels and in their pursuit. Something that's interesting, I believe, in this region would be, let me have a note about it that I want to remember, would be 60% of Great Plains counties lost people from 2000 to 2007. Now, I think there's clear that goes into my message, like from the other slide, where these areas, like when I use the example of the Electoral College, people are leaving these areas to go elsewhere, probably the Southeast or the Southwest, the Pacific Coast, or elsewhere. But these areas are losing economic stability and political stability based on those factors. Slaughterhouses, as mentions in the book, the slaughterhouses used to be union positions that were sort of good jobs, and it's recently turned to migrants, and so those jobs also have left from the standpoint of a stable wage. Continental interior, this is area that's covering 4 major zones: the Canadian Shield, Alaska, the Rockies, and the Great Basin. Colorado foothills in Boulder is where my experience comes from here. A little selfie hiking going on. But Aboriginal peoples and Native Americans control over half of all the lands here that are federally, so there's half of all the lands here are federally owned, and a large percentage of Aboriginal and Native Americans live in this region. The area is sort of the heart of the battles between environmentalists and developers. The Pacific Northwest, we can think of this as a shoestring along the Pacific West Coast. The economy is shifting from extractive resources such as fishing and logging to a knowledge-based, tech-centered economy. Again, if you remember San Francisco, there's milder climates here. Over the past years, there's been the removal of 40 dams to improve the ecological impacts of the environment. And again, that focus on IT has left a knowledge-based economy here in the Pacific Northwest. Our last region is Southern California and the Southwest. This is an attractive climate, good for growing and producing agriculture and ranching. There is the tech industry here, also entertainment. Los Angeles replaced New York as the largest port in the United States, and so that's an important factor of why this region continues to do so well in terms of its local economy. Now, water scarcity here is a major concern. However, it does maintain close ties to Mexico and does get its water pumped in from other river systems outside. So I hope this just provided maybe a little bit more context to things in a short presentation based on the book and a few pictures gathered. But Subregions is the last cap. It ends our chapters, our chapter on North America, the United States and Canada. So we'll be prepared to move on to our next chapter to continue the rest of the Americas.